It was a Tuesday when the bulldozer showed up 2 days after my birthday, coffee still warm in my hand. Name's Caleb Jensen. 68, retired engineer, and that morning the smell of diesel hit harder than any warning letter. The brass valve key my father left me still had grease from '92. What do you do when the place you built gets turned against you? By your own neighbors. Caleb Jensen returned from the general store with a bag of groceries and found a fluorescent orange sign stapled to his wooden gate, demolition notice, 10 days. He stood there longer than he meant to, the plastic bag warming in his palm. The ice cream would be melting. Still, he didn't move. Not yet. He scanned the corners of the notice looking for some typo, some telltale smudge that marked it as a mistake. But there it was, bold, official, and unmistakable. She finally went through with it, he muttered, brushing a fleck of dust off the corner of the paper. The cicadas hummed around him like nothing had happened, but he knew better. The gate creaked as he pushed it open. His boots found the porch with a familiar rhythm. The wood groaned like it always did, like it welcomed him back even now. Inside, the AM radio hummed low. George Jones filling the space with memories that hadn't asked permission to return. Caleb set the groceries down and poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot that had been warming since sunrise. No sugar, no cream, just the way he'd always taken it even before his wife passed. A few minutes later, he was standing in front of the HOA office. The air conditioning blasted out of the cracked doorframe like it was trying to escape. A young man in a tucked polo shirt looked up from behind a desk, clearly startled to see someone walk in without an appointment. "I'm here to speak with Meredith." "Caleb," said his voice, calm but anchored. "Do you have a—" "Tell her it's Jensen." A moment later, Meredith Boyd appeared, her smile as practiced as her French-tipped nails. She wore a pressed blouse the color of bone and carried a binder thicker than the Valley's phone book. "Caleb," she said sweetly, as if they'd run into each other at the diner instead of standing on either side of a slow-burning war. "I wondered when you'd stop by." "You posted a notice on my gate," he said. "Yesterday. Well, it was filed yesterday. Official posting was this morning," she replied, flipping through her binder with the efficiency of someone who loved her tabs. "You understand it's a visual compliance issue. Your property hasn't been updated since the '70s, and it no longer aligns with our modern Valley guidelines. My property predates your charter by 30 years, Caleb said. This cabin was built before you had a name, let alone a board. She tilted her head like he was a quaint relic, something to be dusted and set aside. "But you're still in the Valley," she said, "which means our standards apply." That night, Caleb sat on the porch with Reed Morris, his neighbor and occasional supplier of eggs. Reed handed him a thermos of what he claimed was extra bold, though Caleb suspected it was just yesterday's batch reheated. "She doesn't bluff, you know," Reed said after a long sip. "Meredith. She's not the type to waste a stamp." Caleb nodded, his eyes drifting to the hills beyond the tree line. The air was still. Not a whisper of wind, as if even the landscape was waiting. After Reed left, Caleb walked out to the shed. It still smelled like pine shavings and motor oil, a scent that hadn't changed since his father built it. He reached for the dusty shelf above the workbench and found the old metal box. It hadn't been opened in years, but his hands remembered the way it latched like muscle memory passed down. Inside were the same things he expected: rusty screws, a slide rule, yellowing invoices. And then something unexpected, a folder stamped in fading ink. Water plans. Jensen Sr. Caleb hesitated before pulling it out. The folder crackled in protest. He brought it to the bench, brushed aside a cobweb, and began unrolling the contents. The blueprint unfurled slowly, corners curling like it resisted being read. Caleb leaned closer, and in the lower right corner there it was a signature he knew by heart, his own, dated 1992. Caleb jolted awake at sunrise to the thunder of diesel engines and saw a bulldozer crawling up his gravel driveway. He blinked twice, then pulled his boots on without socks. The engines snarled louder now, gears grinding as the machine crested the slope like a mechanical insect sent to devour. A red flag snapped on its antenna. The man behind the controls didn't look up. The demolition was scheduled in 10 days. The notice had said so plain as day. But this was day 2. Caleb stepped outside, gravel biting through his soles. The bulldozer paused, air brakes hissing. A woman in oversized sunglasses and a linen blouse stood beside a white SUV. Meredith Boyd didn't wave. She nodded like someone appraising produce. "Hold it," Caleb called, raising the worn folder of permits he'd dug out the night before. "You're early. This isn't legal." The bulldozer operator climbed down and walked toward him, wiping his forehead with a sleeve. He had the kind of build you got from lifting more steel than conversation. "Mr. Jensen." "Right. Look, I don't make the rules. Got a permit that says urgent hazard. My guys just follow the list. That permit's wrong. The deadline." "Talk to the HOA," the foreman said, then turned back. Caleb's words trailed off into the growl of the engine. From the passenger seat of the SUV, Meredith emerged, her heels sinking into the gravel with irritating elegance. "It's all in the safety clause, Caleb. Section 14C. Imminent structural failure exempts the 10-day period. We've had complaints. Complaints from who? That porch swing hasn't hurt anyone but a carpenter bee." She didn't answer. Behind her, a crane arm stretched toward the house. With one clean motion, it latched onto the porch swing, his father's handiwork, and yanked it skyward. The chain creaked, then snapped, sending the swing tumbling into a pile of splinters near the iris bed. Caleb felt something sharp in his throat, but he swallowed it. A blue sedan pulled up alongside the gravel. A young woman stepped out, hair tucked under a cap marked Arizona Environmental Division. She carried a clipboard, but didn't look like she planned to use it. "I'm Emily Tran," she said, offering a quick nod toward Caleb. "I was on my way to inspect runoff data near the canal trench. Mind if I step across the east corner?" "Be my guest," Caleb muttered, eyes still on the crane. "It's not like I own it anymore." Emily walked the perimeter boots, kicking dust into the morning light. When she passed near the porch wreckage, she noticed the folder in Caleb's hand. "Are those original plans?" she asked, pausing. 92 revisions, Caleb said, signed and sealed. She crouched for a moment, scanning a map corner. "Jensen, your father helped build the early diversion grids, right? Engineer of record." Caleb nodded. "Before the HOA had a seal to rubber stamp." Emily pulled a card from her vest and handed it over. "If you want an independent opinion on the water infrastructure, call me. I'm just auditing now, but sometimes things get missed." He raised an eyebrow. "You think something's been missed? I think Meredith Boyd doesn't like loose ends," she said, and turned to leave. That evening, after the crew had gone and the dust settled into silence, Caleb sat on the back step with a cold mug of coffee and the folder spread over his knees. The air was still warm, but he could feel the desert losing heat. He flipped pages with the care of someone handling an old friend. His eyes fell on a footnote. "System override authority shall remain with engineer of record." He pulled the blueprint closer. There, tucked beneath the central valve diagram, was a bump in the paper fold. Caleb reached in, gently prying back the crease. A brass key slipped out and landed in his palm with a soft clink. Stamped on it, barely legible after decades, CH-12A Override. He stared at it for a long moment, then stood and crossed to the phone on the wall, its cord curled from years of disuse. He dialed slowly, one finger at a time. "Hi. I think I have a situation regarding unauthorized water diversion." Caleb and Reed crouched in Caleb's garage-turned-workshop, spreading a 30-year-old blueprint across a workbench scarred with history. The paper crinkled and curled at the edges, but the lines were still clear. Arrows, symbols, notations made in his father's hand, and a few updated in Caleb's younger scrawl. Reed leaned over it with the reverence of a man reading scripture. "Your father said this line only worked because the land respected it," Reed said, tapping a long route drawn along a natural ridge. Caleb nodded. It followed the contours. Gravity handled most of it. No pumps, just flow. He turned toward a box filled with other plans and old water board correspondence. It worked for 50 years. No one complained until they wanted it for something else. The screen door banged once. Emily stepped inside holding a binder thick with state documentation. Her boots were coated in red dust, her expression pinched from too many hours in sun and silence. "I brought the records," she said, setting the binder down with a puff of dust. "Water allotments for High Mesa Valley. You're going to want to see this." They worked through the data slowly. Caleb traced his old line with a carpenter's pencil while Emily laid transparent overlays on top mapping the current usage. Her fingers paused when she reached a spur leading east. "This isn't in the original," she said. "It isn't supposed to be," Caleb replied. Emily flipped to a satellite photo. They rerouted the flow to the Braddock Basin. "Isn't that Meredith's ranch?" "Her holding company," Emily said. 1,500 sheep, massive water use, triple the registered allowance. Reed gave a low whistle. All this time and nobody said a word. "They tried," Emily said quietly. "My mother lived on the west side of the ridge. Back in '07, the HOA filed nuisance complaints till she sold. 2 other families before her. Same pattern, lowball, threaten disappear." Caleb stared at the map at the dashed line where his father's system used to run, where the water had once moved like a second breath across the land. His jaw tightened. "I still have override rights," he said, voice low. Emily nodded. "Confirmed it in state archives. They can't be rescinded without a signed revocation, and we couldn't find one." Outside, the wind shifted. Dry leaves scraped across the gravel like whispers. Caleb closed the blueprint gently, then slid it into a folder with a reverence only old engineers truly practiced. "I'm filing temporary revocation of access," he said. That afternoon they drove into town. The Mesa Cafe smelled of bacon and old stories. Jean greeted them without missing a beat. "Your usual gentleman?" she asked. Reed grinned. "You know us too well." She returned with 2 mugs, black as asphalt. Caleb dropped a folded $1 under the sugar jar, exact change beside it. Jean didn't even look, just smiled and moved on. As they left, they passed the community board. Red push pins held up a fresh poster, HOA Community Reminder. Caleb Jensen is banned from meetings until further notice. Community Security Enforcement. Caleb stopped, studied the signature in bold at the bottom. Meredith. He didn't tear it down, just stood there for a beat, then turned toward Reed. "She thinks that'll stop me. Bless her heart." Caleb arrived at the HOA hall right on time, folder in hand, only to find the door locked, blinds drawn, and a fresh sign taped to the window, meeting canceled until further notice. He stood on the concrete stoop for a few seconds, blinking at the paper like it might unstick itself and fly away. The lights inside were off, and the flag out front hung limp against the pole. Monsoon clouds loomed low over High Mesa, promising rain, but delivering only pressure. Footsteps crunched behind him. Reed Morris ambled up the walkway, hands in his pockets. "3rd time this year she's canceled with no notice," he said. Once was termite concerns. Next time it was a clerical scheduling error. Caleb stepped back from the door, scanning the small parking lot. Tom McGrady's rust-colored Chevy rolled in, followed by Eloise's pale blue Suburban, the one with the peeling bumper sticker that said "Peace through Pie." Emily's hybrid pulled up moments later, silent but certain. Tom leaned out the window. "What's the holdup?" "No meeting," Caleb called, apparently indefinitely. Tom frowned and parked. Eloise joined them on the grass with a folding chair she pulled from the back. "Brought tea," she said, passing out cups from an old red ice chest. "Didn't think she'd go through with another cancellation. Guess I gave her too much credit." They gathered on the HOA lawn, the 7 of them sitting in a loose semicircle around a patch of dry crabgrass. A plastic flag from July 4th still stuck in the ground near the sidewalk. Caleb looked down at his folder. His fingers hovered over the edge. "I don't want to make a scene," he began, "but this isn't about paint colors anymore." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Was it ever?" Caleb exhaled, then flipped the folder open. "This land has run on the same water system for decades. My father helped lay it. Now it's being diverted illegally and folks are being bullied off their land." A quiet fell over the group. Clara Boydston, one of the quieter board members, emerged from a sedan across the lot. She approached hesitantly, clutching her purse like a shield. "I didn't know anyone would still be here," she said. Reed gave her a half nod. "The HOA board might be closed, but the community isn't." Clara hesitated. "Meredith told me not to come. Said I'd be fined for interfering with administrative closures. She threatened to audit my landscaping." Emily stepped forward. "That's intimidation, Clara. You don't have to put up with that. No one does." Clara's voice cracked. "I didn't sign up for this. I thought it was about keeping the park clean." Eloise stood and offered Clara a seat and a cup. "Sit down, Hon. Have some lemonade. Been waiting for someone to stand up to her." Caleb glanced at Emily, who nodded toward the folder. "You need to file the revocation formally. Today, if you can." "I will," Caleb said. "But this right here is where it starts." Emily unzipped her bag and pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. She flipped through dog-eared pages until she found the one she wanted. Section 3B. She read aloud, "Any board action that impedes community process may be challenged via citizen assembly." Caleb looked up at the small group around him. None of them wore suits. Most had dirt under their nails. But they were here, and they were listening. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and read the screen. "Water Resources Hearing Scheduled, October the 3rd, Flagstaff Courthouse." By lantern light, Caleb and Reed stood in front of a rusted steel hatch hidden under wildbrush behind the shed. The wind stirred the creosote and sent a low hum across the desert, but beneath the hum was a deeper silence, the kind that lingered in places long forgotten. Caleb crouched and ran his fingers over the seams of the hatch. It hadn't been opened in decades, but the hinges still recognized the memory of movement. He brushed away the dust with his sleeve, revealing faded stenciling CH12 Access. Jensen, Sr. Authorized. "Looks like your dad didn't want this found easy," Reed said, stepping back as Caleb wedged a crowbar under the edge. He always said Caleb grunted as metal gave way with a groan. "Any line can be drawn, son. But the ones underground are hardest to erase." The hatch opened with a reluctant shriek. A damp smell curled up from the darkness below rust-old concrete and the dry residue of long-gone water. They descended slowly, Caleb first with the lantern, Reed behind boots scraping metal rungs that led into the tunnel. Inside, the air felt close but not suffocating. Spray-painted numbers lined the curved concrete, faded but legible. Patches of lichen clung to the joints. The echo of their steps ricocheted down the channel like a whisper trying to find its way home. "There," Caleb said, pointing. A set of rusted clamps held a valve in place bolted to a T-junction where two pipes diverged, one continuing southwest, the other branching off sharply to the east. Faintly, the valve label caught the light, CH12A. Caleb approached with reverence, brushing the dust from the fittings. He unslung a canvas pouch from his shoulder and pulled out a small pressure gauge, attaching it to the valve. A whisper of movement, then numbers danced briefly before settling. "Still holds," he murmured. He turned the valve just slightly. The gauge dropped with a shudder. Somewhere down the tunnel, a distant pipe groaned in protest. He closed it again and leaned against the wall, breathing through his nose. His phone buzzed. He answered without looking. "Yeah." Emily's voice filtered through calm and precise. "I checked the overlay maps. That eastern branch never permitted. Not since '95. They filed dummy maintenance records, but the diversion itself is off-grid." Caleb glanced at the valve again. "Thought so. You have every legal right to file for revocation. Just be sure you document everything." "I will," he said. "Thanks, Emily." He hung up and reached into his jacket, pulling out the brass key. It felt heavier now than it had in the blueprint folder. He rolled it between his fingers, then slipped it into his pocket. "We'll do this by the book," he said aloud. Reed said nothing, just nodded in the lantern's flicker. Back above ground, the wind was colder. Caleb carried the lunchbox his father once used on site, a dented metal thing that had held bolts and sandwiches in equal measure. Inside it, now photos of the valve, a hand-drawn map of the root water logs, and a cover letter bearing the title, "Engineer of Record Water Use Revocation Request." The next morning, he dressed in his good denim and a clean flannel, the kind he wore only for county offices or funerals. He drove into town with the lunchbox on the passenger seat and parked in front of the post office just as the flag was being raised. He mailed the envelope without hesitation. As he stepped out into the street again, a low rumble approached. A large black truck eased past him, windows tinted. The driver slowed as she reached him. Behind the glass, Meredith Boyd's profile turned sunglasses on, unreadable. Then the truck rolled on trailing dust in the silence. The Flagstaff courthouse was cooler than expected, stone walls, state seal, and rows of wooden benches already filling with curious neighbors. Caleb stepped through the brass-trimmed doors, the soles of his boots clicking softly on polished tile. He had worn his father's old tan blazer, the one that smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco, and he carried a folder under one arm with pages tucked neatly into sleeves. Emily met him at the side of the chamber, adjusting her ID badge and handing him a bottled water. "You ready?" she asked. He looked around the room. Locals filed in slowly, some he recognized, others he didn't. Reed took a seat near the aisle, nodding quietly. Even Eloise was there, a thermos in hand and a watchful glint in her eye. "More ready than I thought I'd be," he said. Room B had 2 flags on either side of the raised dais, Arizona's state flag and the Stars and Stripes, both upright and slightly faded. The windows along the west wall were cracked just enough to let in the October breeze rustling the tops of cottonwoods outside. In the back corner, a journalist scribbled notes while another adjusted the settings on a small recorder. Their badges read AZ Public Watchdog and KQRM Northern Report. Meredith Boyd arrived with the click of patent leather heels, her entrance as crisp and calculated as her suit jacket. She took a seat at the front table with a small team, 2 silent men in ties and a woman in a blouse so white it nearly shimmered. Meredith's sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. The Water Department official, Mr. Hatley, called the hearing to order. He read aloud the filing number, then gestured to Caleb. "You may proceed, Mr. Jensen." Caleb stood, cleared his throat once, and began. "My name is Caleb Jensen. I live on property in High Mesa Valley originally surveyed and irrigated by my father in 1971. I was engineer of record on the 1992 update to the canal system, specifically junction CH12A. The brass override key remained in my custody. I have never signed a relinquishment of rights." He stepped to the diagram Emily unrolled beside him. The old blueprint looked delicate against the stiff easel, but it held firm. "This is the original route of the main line. And this," he said, tapping a bold red marker Emily had added, "is the illegal diversion feeding the Boyd Ranch, filed under maintenance but registered to no permit." Murmurs rippled from the back row. Meredith stood and gave a quick, practiced smile. "Mr. Jensen is bitter," she said. "His shack no longer meets visual compliance, and rather than adapt to a modern standard, he's lashing out." Emily didn't flinch. "The compliance notices had no due process, and the ranch you referred to draws nearly 20,000 gallons per week, over 5 times the registered HOA average." Mr. Hatley leaned forward. "Engineer of record rights are intact unless formally rescinded. Were those rights legally removed?" "No, sir," Emily said. "We have notarized documentation. They remain active." Meredith's voice wavered slightly. "This hearing isn't about water, it's about an old man's grudge." Before anyone could respond, a woman near the back stood. "Permission to speak." Hatley hesitated. The woman stepped forward, pulling a slim leather wallet from her jacket. She flipped it open and showed a seal. "Judge Evelyn Ross," she said. "State Judiciary Observer assigned to monitor misuse of municipal infrastructure hearings." She faced the crowd, then turned to Hatley. "Mr. Jensen's request meets all compliance standards. The diversion violates both environmental code and public trust, as authorized under Section 12.7a. His revocation is hereby approved." Silence fell. Meredith blinked rapidly, lips parted as though halfway through a rebuttal no one had asked for. Ross nodded once, then returned to her seat. Caleb exhaled quietly and sat down. Emily placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, just enough to say, "You did it." From the front table, Meredith stared straight ahead. Her voice, barely audible over the shuffling of papers, slipped out into the silence. He was never supposed to win. The morning sun rose over High Mesa Ranch, but instead of glistening irrigation lines, there was only dust and the frantic bleating of thirsty sheep. Meredith stood at the edge of the main paddock, heels biting into cracked earth, a sheen of sweat forming beneath her silk blouse. Beyond the sagging fence, ewes clustered near empty troughs, nudging at spigots that gave nothing. A fly buzzed past her ear, and she waved it away absently, eyes fixed on the bone-dry horizon. The foreman jogged toward her wide-brimmed hat in hand, his face drawn and flushed. "Water trucks from Sedona are backed up. Closest delivery window is Friday. We won't make it 2 more days, not with this heat." Meredith's jaw tightened. "Then get them to move. Pay extra if you have to. They're rationing out there. We're not priority." She didn't answer. Behind her, the barn doors creaked open as one of the ranch hands trudged out empty hose slung over his shoulder. The dust from his boots rose in soft puffs with every step. Word had traveled fast. By mid-morning, residents had begun to gather at the HOA hall, some by foot, others in trucks idling at the curb. The lot brimmed with conversations spoken in hushed tones, but sharp inflection. From Eloise's sun hat to Tom McGrady's denim suspenders, the town was showing up. Inside, the air hung still, as if the building itself held its breath. Meredith entered through the side, slipping into the office marked Executive Only. She closed the door behind her and turned the lock. Clara Boydston was already inside, seated stiffly, her tablet balanced on her knees. "We have to issue a press statement," Meredith said without preamble. "Damage control." Clara didn't look up. "They're not journalists, Meredith. They're neighbors. That's worse." Clara turned the screen toward her. "You might want to read this." An email thread appeared, internal communications detailing water infrastructure expenses redirected under vague budget lines. One message included an attachment, an estimate from a contractor addressed not to the HOA, but to Meredith Boyd Ranch, LLC. "You've been saving these?" "Since March," Clara replied. "I wasn't sure then. I am now." The front doors opened. The murmurs swelled. Reed, in his Sunday flannel, stepped inside with a quiet authority. Behind him, Emily Tran carried a folder thick with documents. And trailing in last, unhurried, was Caleb. He wore the same old blazer, pressed again but no less worn, and carried nothing but the weight of the valley's memory. The crowd parted for Judge Ross. She didn't wear her badge today, just a navy cardigan and a quiet expression. She stepped up to the podium. "I'm here in an observing capacity," she said, voice level, "but I have reviewed the charter. Article 7 permits an emergency leadership vote in the event of confirmed executive misconduct." The room held still. Meredith re-entered, gaze, hard hands folded. "This is mob rule," she snapped. "You don't just overthrow structure because feelings are hurt." Caleb didn't speak. Emily approached the table and set the folder down with care. "These aren't feelings, Meredith. They're filings." Ross nodded once. "All in favor of emergency leadership vote, raise your hand." The pause was brief. Hands rose across the room, young and old, calloused and manicured. Clara's lifted, last trembling slightly. Even Meredith's cousin, seated at the back, did not move. It was done. The vote tallied quickly, and Judge Ross confirmed the result. Meredith's removal was legal and immediate. No one clapped. There were no cheers, only the quiet rustling of paper and a few murmured thank yous. Meredith gathered her bag with unsteady fingers and moved toward the door. Her heels clicked once, then again, then faltered slightly as she crossed the threshold. Outside, the dust was beginning to settle. She passed the gravel walk, reached the bottom of the steps, and hesitated. Someone, perhaps Eloise or one of the McGrady boys, whispered behind her, "It was never your lake, or your valley." Caleb sat on his new porch, watching the first leaves fall from the cottonwood trees, cider steaming gently in his hands. The scent of spice and wood smoke hung in the air, mingling with the faint laughter drifting from the community park just beyond the rise. High Mesa Valley had taken on its autumn colors slowly this year, as if reluctant to let go of the warmth. The canal shimmered in the distance, its waters gliding steady and silent the way they had been meant to from the start. His father's words played quietly in his mind like the worn chorus of an old country tune. The real power. It isn't force. It's knowing when to let the current run. A knock on the porch rail drew his eyes. A woman in a green parka stepped forward, mid-30s, crisp and official. "Mr. Jensen," she asked. "Tanya Reyes, Water Council Liaison. I'm here on behalf of the advisory committee." Caleb set down the mug. "Let me guess y'all want to hand me a shiny title and stick me in a windowless room full of charts." She smiled. "We'd like to offer you an honorary role. No charts, I promise. Just your insight when you're willing." He nodded slowly. "Only if you bring the coffee." "Deal." From the porch he could see families gathering at the community park. Picnic tables bore plastic containers of mashed sweet potatoes, cornbread, and someone's famous green bean casserole. A child darted by with a football chased half-heartedly by a dog in a turkey sweater. Near the canal, Emily Tran walked with a woman older than Reed, their silhouettes familiar yet softened by time. Her mother. They paused by the water's edge where cattails swayed gently. Emily reached down, let her hand skim the surface, and smiled. Across the way, half hidden by tall grass, stood Meredith. Thinner now. Shoulders hunched beneath a heavy coat. She bent low, unscrewing the cap on a gallon jug and filling a rusted bowl near the base of her fence. A squirrel crept near, then drank. Meredith didn't shoo it away. She stood for a long moment, eyes locked on the water's flow. Then she turned and vanished behind her gate. Reed joined Caleb on the porch with 2 paper plates in hand. "Hope you're hungry." "Jean made the good stuffing this year, none of that boxed nonsense." Caleb chuckled. "Did she spike it with gravy again? She calls it enhanced." Reed handed over the plate. "Figured we'd do a toast after the pie." Below, Judge Ross helped set folding chairs under the cottonwood trees, her cardigan sleeves pushed to the elbows. Clara arranged pitchers of lemonade with the efficiency of someone who'd done this all her life, not just since the vote. Later, under the warm blush of sunset, Reed stood on an old tree stump and cleared his throat. People quieted slowly, plates in hand, kids stilling just long enough to listen. To those who built something and chose not to break it, Reed said. No one clapped, but nearly everyone raised a glass. When the last of the food was cleared and the portable TV had been turned off after the 4th quarter, Caleb made his way back to the porch. He stepped inside the shed, where the metal toolbox still sat paint-faded and handle smooth from decades of use. He opened the lid and placed the brass valve key inside, where it nestled against a few bent nails, an old compass, and a single flathead screwdriver. Then he shut the box and turned the latch. Outside, the canal flowed on. He walked down to its edge. A dog barked behind him. A cottonwood leaf spun down through the golden air and landed silently at his feet. Caleb looked out over the water, hands resting in his coat pockets. "Now it flows right," he said. The valley had changed, not with noise or fanfare, but with quiet footsteps and steady hands. What began as a lone man defending a patch of earth became a chorus of neighbors reclaiming what was theirs all along. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble beneath their own weight. Maybe the strength of a town isn't in its laws, but in the way folks look out for one another. And sometimes all it takes is one steady voice to remind the current which way to flow.